It began not with an announcement, but with a silence, an absence so deliberate it echoed through the corridors of Kensington Palace. When Princess Alexandra's private will was quietly opened, one name stood firm, Lady Louise, and just as striking, several others did not. What was meant to be a dignified transfer of legacy has now erupted into a question that no one inside the palace seems willing to answer. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. There were no grand statements, no ceremonial acknowledgements, no carefully staged photographs to soften the moment. Instead, the revelation unfolded behind closed doors, in a setting described by those familiar with such proceedings as unusually controlled, almost guarded to the point of discomfort. Reports suggest that only a very limited circle was present when the contents of Princess Alexandra's will were formally acknowledged. Senior aides, legal representatives, and a handful of trusted figures whose loyalty to the institution is rarely questioned. And within minutes of that reading, a quiet certainty settled over the room. Lady Louise Windsor had been named the primary heir to a jewelry collection that carried not just financial value, but generations of royal memory. But it wasn't the selection itself that caused the first ripple of tension. Lady Louise, known for her reserved nature and careful adherence to royal expectations, seemed in many ways an unsurprising choice. What unsettled those present, what lingered in the silence, long after the documents were closed, was the absence. Names that some had expected, or at least speculated about in private conversations, were nowhere to be found. Among them, most notably, were the children of Meghan Markle. The omission was not explained, not contextualized, not even acknowledged in the formal language of the will. It simply existed, quiet, undeniable, and impossible to ignore. Insiders whisper that the reaction in those early moments was not explosive, but something far more telling. It was restraint. Aides reportedly exchanged brief glances, careful not to betray too much, while others maintained a practiced composure that has long defined the inner workings of the royal household. Yet, even within that controlled environment, there was an unmistakable shift, a sense that something significant had just occurred, something that extended beyond the personal wishes of Princess Alexandra and into the delicate, often unspoken dynamics of the modern monarchy. Palace administrative streams, ranging from discreet legal briefings to carefully monitored communications, appear to have moved quickly in response. Instructions were reportedly issued with unusual urgency, emphasizing discretion at every level. Staff were advised to avoid speculation, to refrain from informal discussions, and to direct any external inquiries through strictly controlled channels. For an institution accustomed to managing information with precision, this level of containment stood out. It wasn't just about protecting privacy, it felt, to some observers, like an effort to contain a narrative before it could fully take shape. And yet, as is often the case within the orbit of the royal family, silence only seemed to amplify curiosity. Royal watchers, those who have spent years decoding the subtle signals and shifts within the House of Windsor, began to notice patterns. The absence of commentary, the lack of clarification, the careful, almost deliberate avoidance of certain topics in public appearances and briefings. It was, as one seasoned observer reportedly noted, the kind of silence that speaks louder than any statement. Different interpretations of this moment have already begun to emerge. Some suggest that Princess Alexandra's decision was guided by a deeply personal sense of trust and familiarity, shaped over years of quiet relationships and shared experiences. Others, however, see it as part of a broader pattern, one that reflects the evolving priorities of a monarchy navigating the tension between tradition and modernity. Why were certain names included, while others were not? Why was the distribution handled with such visible caution? And perhaps most importantly, what does this reveal about the unseen forces that continue to shape decisions at the highest levels of the royal family? The questions linger, unanswered, but impossible to dismiss. Because beneath the surface of this seemingly private matter lies something far more complex, a web of relationships, expectations, and unspoken rules that have defined the monarchy for generations. And as the story begins to unfold, it becomes clear that this was never just about jewels or even inheritance. It was about position, about belonging, about who stands within the circle of trust and who, for reasons not yet fully understood, does not. But the decision wasn't sudden, it was rooted in a legacy stretching back decades, shaped by loyalty, duty, and unspoken expectations. Long before headlines, these jewels carried stories of coronations, quiet sacrifices, and a monarchy bound by tradition. They were never simply ornaments, never just glittering pieces locked away in velvet-lined cases. Each stone, each setting, each carefully preserved clasp held within it a fragment of royal memory, stretching back through decades of duty and devotion. Reports suggest that much of Princess Alexandra's collection was not assembled through extravagance, but through inheritance, gifts of state, and deeply personal exchanges within the inner circle of the royal family. Some pieces, it is whispered, were worn during moments that defined an era, formal receptions that shaped diplomacy, ceremonies that reinforced continuity, and private gatherings where the true weight of royal life quietly settled on those born into it. There is a certain reverence attached to such collections within the monarchy, an understanding that these items are not owned in the conventional sense. They are held, guarded, passed down not merely as possessions but as responsibilities. Insiders often describe royal heirlooms as part of what has been called the sacred thread of continuity, a symbolic link between past and present, between those who served and those expected to carry that service forward. And in that context, Princess Alexandra's jewelry was never just about beauty or value. It was about meaning, about legacy, about the silent language of tradition that governs decisions few ever truly witness. Different interpretations of her collection's origins point to a life deeply embedded within the rhythms of royal duty. Unlike more public-facing figures, Alexandra maintained a quieter presence, yet her role was no less significant. She attended countless engagements, supported key institutions, and upheld the expectations placed upon her with a consistency that rarely drew headlines but always commanded respect within the palace. Over time, the pieces she wore became associated with that very identity, steadfast, unassuming, and unwaveringly loyal to the crown. And that is where the deeper symbolism begins to take shape. Because within the House of Windsor, heirlooms are not distributed casually. They follow patterns unwritten, yet widely understood among those familiar with the institution's inner workings. There is a long-standing tradition, often reinforced through subtle precedent, that such items are entrusted to individuals who remain actively engaged in royal service. Those who represent the monarchy not just in name, but in action. It is a philosophy rooted in continuity. The idea that symbols of the crown should remain in the hands of those who continue to embody its responsibilities. Sources close to royal historians suggest that this approach has been quietly reinforced over generations. Pieces linked to significant events are often passed to those expected to appear at similar moments in the future. Jewelry worn during state occasions tends to remain within the circle of working royals, ensuring that its presence continues to reinforce the institution's public image. It is, in many ways, a form of silent storytelling where the past is carried forward, not through words, but through carefully preserved symbols. Princess Alexandra, by all accounts, was deeply aligned with this way of thinking. Her life reflected a commitment to what many describe as a do-to-first philosophy, a belief that personal preference must always yield to the needs of the institution. Insiders whisper that this mindset influenced not only her public role, but also the private decisions she made regarding her legacy. In that sense, the distribution of her jewelry was never going to be random. It was always going to reflect the values she upheld, the priorities she respected, and the quiet but powerful expectations that define royal continuity. And yet, within that tradition lies an unspoken hierarchy. A subtle, often unacknowledged understanding that proximity to royal duty carries weight not just in public recognition, but in matters of inheritance as well. Those who remain within the fold, who continue to serve, who align themselves with the institution's enduring principles, are often seen as natural custodians of its most symbolic assets. It is not a rule written in law, but it is one that has shaped countless decisions behind palace doors. Which brings the story back to the present moment, where questions of inclusion and exclusion have begun to surface with renewed intensity. Because if these heirlooms are indeed guided by tradition, by service, by proximity to the crown, then the choices made in Princess Alexandra's will begin to take on a different meaning, one that extends beyond personal preference and into the very structure of the monarchy itself. A structure that rewards loyalty, that prioritizes continuity, and that, at times, draws lines that are as quiet, they are consequential. And among all possible heirs, one name aligned perfectly with that philosophy: Lady Louise. She was never the loudest voice in the room, but perhaps that was exactly the point. In a family where every gesture is scrutinized and every word carries consequence, Lady Louise Windsor seemed to move differently, quieter, steadier, almost deliberately removed from the noise that so often surrounds the House of Windsor. Reports suggest her upbringing was carefully shaped to shield her from the relentless intensity that defines royal life at its highest levels. While others were thrust into global attention from an early age, Louise's path unfolded at a more measured pace, guided by a philosophy that valued normalcy as much as it did tradition. And yet, that very distance from the spotlight may have become her greatest strength. Those familiar with royal circles often describe her as grounded in a way that feels increasingly rare. There is no urgency in her public presence, no sense of performance. Instead, there is restraint, a quiet confidence that does not demand attention but earns it over time. Insiders whisper that this demeanor did not go unnoticed among senior members of the royal family, particularly those who place immense value on discretion and discipline. In an institution where missteps can echo for years, reliability becomes a currency of its own, and Lady Louise, it seems, has accumulated it in abundance. Her relationship with figures like Princess Alexandra is often described as one of mutual respect, shaped not by obligation but by shared values. Both women, in different ways, embodied a version of royal duty that rarely seeks recognition. It is the kind of service that happens away from headlines, in the steady rhythm of commitments fulfilled and expectations met without complaint. Sources suggest that this alignment created a bond that extended beyond formal family ties, rooted instead in a deeper understanding of what it means to serve the crown without drawing attention to oneself. Over time, that understanding began to manifest in subtle but significant ways. Observers note that Lady Louise's presence at royal engagements has grown more consistent in recent years, her role evolving almost imperceptibly. There are no dramatic announcements marking this shift, no declarations of new responsibilities. Instead, there is a gradual integration, a sense that she is stepping into a space that has been carefully prepared for her. It is a transition defined not by ambition, but by readiness. And perhaps that is why, when the question of inheritance arose, her name carried such weight. Within the monarchy, legacy items are rarely entrusted to those who seek them. They are given to those deemed capable of carrying their meaning forward without altering their essence. In that context, Lady Louise has often been described as a safe pair of hands, a phrase that, while understated, holds profound significance within royal tradition. It suggests trust, stability, and assurance that what has been preserved for generations will remain intact under her care. But beneath that trust lies something even more telling: alignment. Alignment with the values that have long defined the monarchy's inner core: service, restraint, and an unwavering commitment to duty. In many ways, Lady Louise represents a continuation of that ethos, a living embodiment of what some within the palace still consider the ideal royal path. Not one driven by visibility or influence, but by quiet, consistent dedication to the institution itself. And yet, as her role becomes more defined, as her position within this intricate system grows clearer, the implications of that trust begin to ripple outward. Because every decision within the royal family, no matter how private it may seem, carries a message, a signal about priorities, about belonging, about who is seen as part of the future and who is not. And in this case, the message is becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. But where one heir was quietly affirmed, others were just as quietly excluded, and that absence is now impossible to ignore. It wasn't just who was chosen, it was who wasn't. Because as the weight of Princess Alexandra's decision began to settle, the silence surrounding certain names grew louder than any formal declaration ever could. Among those absent were the children of Meghan Markle, a detail that, according to various interpretations circulating among royal observers, was noticed almost immediately by those familiar with the intricate dynamics of the family. It wasn't openly addressed, not in the language of the will, nor in any subsequent clarification. But its presence is its absence, rather created a quiet tension that has since evolved into a far more public conversation. At the center of that conversation are Prince Archie and Princess Lilibet, two figures whose connection to the royal family exists in a space that is both undeniable and, at times, deeply complicated. Reports suggest that their omission from this particular inheritance has reignited questions that have lingered for years, questions about proximity, about participation, and about what it truly means to belong within an Arabic Aleph, Arabic Lam, Arabic Meme, Arabic Hamza Lawal, Arabic Sin, Arabic Temer Buddha that has long defined itself through presence as much as lineage. Insiders whisper that Princess Alexandra's decision may have been influenced by what some describe as practical considerations, a phrase that, while vague, carries significant weight within royal circles. It hints at factors that are rarely spoken aloud, but often understood. Physical distance from the United Kingdom, limited involvement in official royal duties, and the broader reality of lives being lived largely outside the traditional framework of the monarchy. In that context, inheritance becomes not just a matter of family connection, but of continuity, of ensuring that symbolic assets remain within the orbit of those who actively represent the crown. But such interpretations, while grounded in precedent, do little to quiet the growing unease among those who view the situation through a different lens. For some, the exclusion raises uncomfortable questions about fairness, about whether tradition, in its strictest form, risks creating divisions that extend beyond protocol and into the realm of perception. Is proximity to royal life a valid measure of entitlement? Or does it, in moments like this, reveal an underlying tension between the institution's need for control and the evolving expectations of a global audience? The debate has not remained confined to private discussions. It has begun to surface in broader conversations, where royal watchers, commentators, and even casual observers attempt to piece together a narrative that the palace itself has chosen not to articulate. Some argue that the decision reflects a clear and consistent application of long-standing principles and adherence to a system that prioritizes Arabic Aleph, Arabic Lam, Arabic T, Arabic Dao, Arabic Meme, Arabic Temer Buddha, and visibility within the monarchy. Others, however, see it as part of a larger pattern, one that underscores the growing Arabic Fa, Arabic Aleph, Arabic Sada, Arabic Lam, Arabic Temer Buddha between different branches of the royal family. And within that pattern lies a deeper, more unsettling question. Because if inheritance within the monarchy is shaped not only by bloodline but by alignment, by presence, by participation, by adherence to a specific set of expectations, then what does that mean for those who exist outside that framework? What does it signal about their place within the institution's future? These are not questions that can be easily answered, and yet they continue to surface, quietly but persistently, in the wake of Alexandra's decision. Palace administrative streams remain characteristically restrained, offering no direct commentary, no attempt to reframe the narrative. And perhaps that restraint is intentional. Because in the absence of explanation, interpretation takes its place, and with it, a growing sense that this moment is about more than a single inheritance. It is about the boundaries of belonging, the conditions of inclusion, the unspoken rules that govern who is entrusted with the symbols of the crown and who is left standing just outside that circle. And as speculation grows louder, attention turns to the one figure whose reaction could reshape everything: Meghan herself. Across the Atlantic, the silence may be even louder. Because while the decision surrounding Princess Alexandra's inheritance settled into quiet certainty within royal walls, its echo traveled far beyond them, reaching the distant, carefully constructed world of Meghan Markle and Prince Harry. And yet, no immediate response followed. No statement. No subtle clarification through familiar channels. Just silence. A silence that, according to those who track every movement within this ongoing story, feels less like absence and more like calculation. Reports suggest that behind that silence, there may be a more complex emotional landscape unfolding. Various interpretations of the situation describe a sense of quiet disappointment, perhaps not explosive, not publicly visible, but deeply felt. Because this was never just about jewelry, it was about recognition, about connection, about whether a branch of the family that has already navigated years of tension now finds itself further distanced from the symbolic heart of the monarchy. And for figures whose relationship with the institution has been marked by both belonging and separation, such moments carry a weight that extends far beyond the immediate. Insiders whisper that this development may have reopened old fractures, reminding both sides of divisions that were never fully resolved. The Sussexes' departure from active royal duties, their relocation, and the public narratives that followed have already reshaped their place within the royal structure. But this quiet exclusion feels different. It is not a public disagreement or a media exchange. It is something more permanent, symbolic, a decision made not in the heat of conflict, but in the calm, deliberate language of legacy. And that is precisely why it resonates so deeply, because legacy decisions are not easily undone. They are not reactive. They are reflective, shaped by years of observation, by patterns of behavior, by perceptions formed over time. So when Alexandra's will placed its trust so clearly in one direction, it inevitably raised questions about how others are perceived within that same framework. Questions that, for Meghan and Harry, may not be easily dismissed. At the same time, the broader media landscape has begun to interpret this moment through its own lens. Some narratives frame the exclusion as part of a continuing pattern, a series of decisions that appear to reinforce a divide between the Sussexes and the core of the royal family. Others caution against such conclusions, suggesting that the situation is far more nuanced, shaped by tradition and precedent rather than personal intent. But regardless of interpretation, the story has gained momentum, drawing attention not just to what happened, but to what it might signify. Public relations considerations now hover over both sides of the Atlantic, subtle but undeniable. For the Sussexes, any response, whether spoken or unspoken, will be carefully weighed, its implications extending beyond this single issue. For the palace, maintaining its characteristic restraint becomes even more critical, as every silence, every carefully chosen word, contributes to the narrative taking shape. It is a delicate balance, one that reflects the broader tension between personal identity and institutional responsibility. And within that balance lies the question that continues to linger, quietly but persistently. Is reconciliation still possible? Can relationships strained by distance, by differing expectations, by years of public and private challenges, find a way back to something resembling unity? Or does this moment, this seemingly small, deeply symbolic decision mark another step in a gradual, irreversible separation? The answers are not yet clear. Perhaps they are not even fully formed. But what is certain is that this story is no longer confined to a single inheritance or a single decision. It has become part of a larger narrative, one that speaks to the evolving nature of the monarchy itself, and the complex, often fragile relationships that exist within it. But beyond personal reactions lies a broader issue: what this decision reveals about the monarchy's evolving priorities. This was never just about jewelry, it was about the future shape of the crown. Because beneath the surface of Princess Alexandra's decision lies a far more consequential reality, one that has been quietly unfolding within the monarchy for years. The divide between tradition and modern identity is no longer a subtle undercurrent, it is a defining tension, shaping choices that may appear personal, but are, in truth, deeply institutional. On one side stands the enduring model of the working royal, bound by duty, visibility, and an unspoken contract with the crown. On the other, a more independent path, one that steps away from formal obligations while still maintaining a connection to royal lineage. And it is within this divide that the meaning of Alexandra's will begins to sharpen. Reports suggest that the monarchy has, over time, grown increasingly deliberate in reinforcing the distinction between these roles, not through public declarations, but through actions quiet, calculated, and often symbolic. Inheritance, particularly of items steeped in historical and ceremonial significance, has become one such mechanism. It is not simply about who receives what, but about what that transfer represents: a continuation of service, a preservation of identity, a signal about where the institution's trust and its future truly lies. Historical precedent supports this pattern. Various interpretations of past royal decisions reveal a consistent tendency to place significant heirlooms in the hands of those who remain actively engaged in royal duties. These are not arbitrary choices. They are guided by a philosophy that views such items as extensions of the crown itself, symbols that must remain closely tied to its public presence. In that sense, inheritance becomes a form of stewardship, entrusted to individuals who are expected to carry forward not just the objects, but the values they embody. And those values are not negotiable. They are rooted in continuity, in the preservation of a system that has endured by adapting carefully, not radically. Insiders often describe this approach as a form of institutional self-protection, a way of ensuring that the monarchy's most powerful symbols are not diluted or disconnected from their original purpose. Jewelry, in this context, is not merely decorative. It is ceremonial. It appears at state events, at moments that reinforce the crown's authority and relevance. To place such items outside the orbit of active royal life would, according to this logic, risk weakening that connection. Yet this perspective does not exist in isolation. It collides with a modern audience that increasingly values inclusivity, transparency, and fairness. For many observers, the idea that inheritance could be influenced by one's level of participation in royal duties raises difficult questions. Should legacy be determined by service or by lineage alone? Is the monarchy preserving its strength or reinforcing divisions that may, over time, challenge its relevance? These questions do not have simple answers, and perhaps that is why they are rarely addressed directly. Instead, they surface in moments like this, where a single decision reflects a broader strategy. A strategy that prioritizes clarity within the institution, even if it creates ambiguity in public perception. Because while the monarchy must adapt to survive, it must also remain anchored to the principles that define it. And in that balancing act, every choice carries weight. What makes this moment particularly significant is not just the decision itself, but what it reveals about the monarchy's current priorities. There is a sense, according to those who observe these patterns closely, that the institution is drawing clearer lines, subtle but unmistakable. Lines that distinguish between those who represent the crown in an official capacity and those who exist beyond that framework. Lines that determine not only roles, but recognition, inclusion, legacy. And perhaps most striking of all is the quiet certainty with which this decision was made. There was no attempt to soften its implications, no visible effort to frame it in a more inclusive light. It was, in many ways, a statement calm, deliberate, and rooted in a long-standing understanding of how the monarchy preserves itself. A reminder that, at its core, the institution operates according to its own logic, one that does not always align with external expectations. And yet, even within these traditions, timing is everything, and this moment feels far from accidental. Why now? Why this decision at this exact moment in royal history? Because timing within the monarchy is rarely accidental. It is deliberate, measured, and often deeply revealing. As Princess Alexandra's will surfaces in this precise window amid a period of visible transition and quiet uncertainty within the royal family, the question of why now begins to carry as much weight as the decision itself. The years 2025 and 2026 have already been marked by subtle but undeniable shifts as the institution continues to navigate a future shaped by generational change, evolving public expectations, and the enduring pressure to maintain relevance without sacrificing tradition. Reports suggest that inheritance and legacy planning have become increasingly central to internal discussions during this period. With senior figures aging and roles gradually shifting, the monarchy appears to be reinforcing its long-term structure not through grand declarations, but through carefully executed decisions that define who carries its symbols forward. In that context, Alexandra's will is not an isolated act. It is part of a broader pattern, one that reflects a heightened awareness of how legacy must be preserved, controlled, and perhaps most importantly, understood by those who will inherit it. Insiders whisper that the decision may also serve as a signal, a quiet but unmistakable message about the values that continue to guide the institution. Loyalty, proximity, commitment to royal duty. These are not new principles, but their reinforcement at this particular moment suggests a renewed emphasis on clarity. A need to draw distinctions that, while subtle, shape the monarchy's internal hierarchy. Because within the House of Windsor, hierarchy is not just about titles or succession. It is about trust, about who is seen as aligned with the institution's core identity and who exists at a distance from it. That distance, whether geographical or relational, appears to play a significant role in how such decisions are perceived. Those familiar with royal operations often note that presence matters not just physically, but symbolically. To be present is to participate, to represent, to reinforce the crown's connection to the public. And in a system that relies heavily on continuity, those who maintain that presence are often viewed as essential to its survival. Alexandra's choice, in this light, becomes more than personal. It becomes structural. There are also suggestions carefully framed, never confirmed, that senior figures within the royal family may have influenced, or, at the very least, shaped the environment in which such decisions are made, not through direct intervention, but through the steady reinforcement of expectations that define what it means to uphold royal legacy. It is a form of guidance that operates quietly, almost invisibly, yet its impact is unmistakable. Because when patterns emerge across generations, they are rarely coincidental. And perhaps that is where the deeper significance of this moment lies. Not in the immediate outcome, but in the message it sends to those who will follow. To younger members of the royal family, the implications are clear, even if unspoken. Duty is not optional. Proximity is not incidental. Alignment with the institution's values is not merely encouraged, it is expected. And those expectations, once understood, shape not only individual choices, but the future direction of the monarchy itself. For the public, however, the message is more complex. It invites interpretation, debate, reflection on what the monarchy represents in a modern world. Is it an institution defined by tradition, preserving its structure through carefully maintained boundaries? Or is it something more fluid, capable of adapting to changing notions of family and identity? Alexandra's decision does not answer these questions outright, but it does bring them into sharper focus. And in doing so, it transforms what might have been seen as a private matter into something far more consequential. A moment that captures the intersection of past and future, of personal choice and institutional necessity. A reminder that within the royal family, even the quietest decisions can carry echoes that extend far beyond their immediate context. In the end, the jewels may sparkle, but the message they carry is far more enduring. In the quiet after the headlines fade, only legacy remains. And as the intensity of speculation begins to settle, what is left behind is not noise, not controversy, but something far more enduring, an unspoken transfer of responsibility that now rests firmly in the hands of Lady Louise Windsor. Because beyond the debates, beyond the analysis, beyond the lingering questions, her role has shifted in a way that cannot be undone. She is no longer simply a quiet presence within the royal structure. She has become, in a deeply symbolic sense, a custodian of history itself. Reports suggest that this transition carries a weight few outside the institution can fully grasp. To inherit such a collection is not to possess it, but to safeguard it, to ensure that its meaning, its connection to the crown, remains intact for generations yet to come. Each piece, each carefully preserved heirloom, now exists not just as a reflection of the past, but as a responsibility for the future. And in that responsibility lies a quiet transformation, one that elevates Lady Louise's position within the monarchy without the need for announcement or acknowledgement. There is something almost poetic in the way this transfer unfolds. No grand ceremony marks the moment. No public declaration defines its significance. And yet, its impact is unmistakable. It represents a passing of trust from one generation to the next, a continuation of values that have been carefully protected through time. In many ways, it is the monarchy at its most authentic, operating not through spectacle, but through quiet, deliberate continuity. And still, the questions remain. The absence that sparked so much attention does not simply disappear. It lingers, woven into the broader narrative that now surrounds this decision. Conversations about inclusion and exclusion continue to surface, shaped by perspectives that extend far beyond the palace walls. For some, the outcome reinforces a sense of order, a reaffirmation of the principles that have long guided royal life. For others, it raises concerns about fairness, about whether tradition, in its strictest form, risks leaving certain voices unheard. But within the monarchy itself, the message appears clear. The institution endures not by adapting to every external expectation, but by preserving the structures that define it. Family, in this context, is inseparable from duty, but it does not override it. The crown remains at the center, its needs shaping decisions that may, at times, feel deeply personal but are ultimately institutional. And it is this distinction between family and function that continues to define the monarchy's approach to legacy. Lady Louise's new role, then, becomes more than a personal milestone. It is a reflection of that very principle. A reminder that within the House of Windsor, trust is not granted lightly, and responsibility is never symbolic alone. It is lived, carried forward, protected with the same quiet determination that has sustained the monarchy through generations of change. And perhaps that is the most enduring element of all. Not the jewels themselves, not the decisions that brought them into new hands, but the continuity they represent. A line that stretches from past to present, unbroken despite the complexities that surround it. A system that, for all its challenges, continues to define itself through the careful preservation of its core identity. Because in the House of Windsor, inheritance is never just about what is given, it's about what is meant to endure. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.